In this video I'm going to show you the world's first selfie and 19 other photographic and cinematographic marvels. For the vast majority of human existence, we can only know what went on in the past through paintings and drawings, writings and word of mouth. But then everything changed. In 1826 photography and in 1888 cinematography. From those dates, history literally springs to life. If a YouTuber in 1,000 years wants to make a video about the very first humans ever to be photographed or videoed, then they'd have to make the video that I'm about to show you, because this is the limit. Prior to what I'm about to show you, we can only see the world as others have interpreted it, not how it actually was. But I also have another treat for you. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you the little-known story of the world's first photograph and how, through some twists and turns, we arrived at the world's first movie. It's a video I made last year and it's a fascinating story. I think you'll enjoy it. But for now, please sit back and enjoy these photographic and cinematographic gems. They've always fascinated me and I think they'll fascinate you too. Starting with the world's first selfie. The world's first selfie was taken by this man, Robert Cornelius. He's pictured here in 1876, aged 67. He was an American photographer and lamp manufacturer. In 1840, he set up one of the world's first photographic studios here in Philadelphia, where he became a pioneer in reducing exposure times, building on the successes of Louis Daguerre. This is the view from his studio on 8th and Market Street in Philadelphia, and here's some photographs that he took from there. All of these people are amongst the very first people ever to be photographed in the world, including this terrifying man. What on earth happened to him? But he's most remembered for this photograph that he took of himself in 1839. It's generally accepted as the earliest photographic self-portrait and possibly even the earliest ever photographic portrait, period. Louis Daguerre had only just completed his first successful photographs using his new daguerreotype technique just 12 months earlier. And here's Robert Cornelius turning the camera on himself to make the world's first selfie. There are other claims that exist for the first photographic portrait, but this is the one with irrefutable evidence and provenance. He's a handsome 30-year-old young man here in 1839, making human and photographic history. Incredibly, you're looking at a selfie here of a man who was born in 1809. This is a photograph of Catherine Dorothy Draper, taken in approximately 1891 at the age of 84. She was born in England in 1807 and she moved to the States in 1832. She and her family settled in Virginia. She was an artist, a teacher and a chemist who never married and died in 1901 at the age of 94. This is a photograph of Catherine 51 years earlier as a beautiful 33-year-old. This photograph vies with Cornelius's portrait as the first ever portrait. It's not a selfie though. It was taken by her brother, John William Draper, who, like Robert Cornelius, helped to develop portrait photography as a thriving business. He got the exposure time down to 65 seconds. Catherine had to sit for that period of time, motionless and without blinking, with her face covered in flour for increased contrast. Apparently, he'd taken portraits before this one of his female assistant, which is now, sadly, lost to time. We can say that this is one of the very earliest ever portraits of a human being in the world, and possibly the first portrait of a female to be taken in the United States. Thanks to her pioneering brother, Catherine Dorothy Draper will be forever known as one of the very first human beings ever to be photographed. There are two main contenders for the title of earliest born person ever to be photographed. Conrad Heyer was born in the province of Massachusetts Bay. We're not exactly sure of the year, but it's generally accepted that he was born April the 10th, 1749 or 1753. We can't even say that he was born in the United States because that didn't even exist yet. It was claimed he was 103 years old in 1852 when this photograph was taken. We're looking into the eyes of a person here who fought in the American American Revolutionary War and was already in his late 20s when the Declaration of Independence was signed. We don't need to rely on a painting to see this man born in 1749. We can see him how he actually was, thanks to a daguerreotype which captured nature through light. The main contender for the crown of earliest born person to have been photographed, and to my mind a more likely candidate, was shoemaker John Adams. It's claimed he was born on the 1st of February 1745, and, like Conrad Heyer, he lived in the province of Massachusetts Bay. Maybe they both went to the same studio to get their photographs taken. It's said that this photograph was taken on the occasion of his 100th birthday in February 1845. If his birth year is to be believed, then he does steal Conrad Heyer's crown by at least 4 years. There is actually one more contender for the title of earliest born person ever photographed, and that's Hannah Stille Gorby. There's quite good evidence to say she was born in 1746 in what was to become the United States of America. The original daguerreotype is sadly lost, and we can only rely on its inclusion in a book printed in 1936. It claims to show Gorby aged 99 in 1845, so she could be the earliest born person ever photographed, or the earliest born woman ever photographed. I think we can say this with a degree of certainty, that one of these three people represent the earliest view of humanity we have. There are no known earlier examples of people born before these dates for whom we have a photographic record. The first photograph ever taken anywhere in the world was this one, the view from the window at Le Gras, by the father of photography, Joseph Nicéphore Niepce, in 1826. You're now looking at the earliest glimpse of the world we have, and not a paintbrush in sight. Exposure took all day long, so having a human in photos back then was out of the question. This is the world's very first movie, shot on a single lens using film in 1888. Today it's known as the Roundhay garden scene, and it's the very first time that we can see human beings moving on film. This is the very first photograph ever taken of a human being. It's a daguerreotype, and it was taken by Louis Daguerre himself. Exposure time took around 15 minutes at this point, so none of the carriages or pedestrians show up, except this man having his shoe shined. He stood there motionless, just long enough to appear on the photograph. This may well be the first video ever of a human being. A man walking around a corner was shot in 1887. It's not a film, it's a series of 16 photographs shot on a 16-lens camera by French photographic pioneer Louis Le Prince. Here the photographs have been stitched together to give the illusion of movement. Dare we say that this is the very first person ever to be recorded moving? I think we can, but with the caveat that this is not a film. These four groundbreaking and astonishing pieces of history are linked and covered in more detail at the end of this segment, if you'd like to watch it. Le Prince wasn't the only person experimenting with rapid-fire photography to create the illusion of movement. The earliest pioneer of it was the decidedly strange and eccentric Edward Muybridge. His actual name was Edward Muggeridge, but he clearly decided that that was not exotic enough. He was probably the first person to make images move, using a technique which at the time was called chronophotography. Still photographs taken so quickly that they could record motion through the passage of time. Chrono comes from the word chronos, Greek for time. Muybridge had been experimenting for 10 years with chronophotography. His earliest efforts did look good, but lacked definition, and were barely better than silhouettes. In 1887, though, he produced his defining work, which caused genuine shock and astonishment at the time. His Horse in Motion, made in 1887, was made using 24 cameras and a tripwire. The horses themselves were firing the cameras. This isn't a film, but it's definitely a moving image. This jockey, a man walking around a corner, this couple, or indeed any of Muybridge's 1887 subjects, could lay claim to being the very first animated human in the world. Muybridge lived an unconventional life and had a CV which included shooting his wife's lover and then subsequently getting away with murder at trial. He can claim, however, to be one of the very first people who started to get pictures moving. This This is the first ever photograph of a British monarch. It was taken in 1844 and features Queen Victoria and her eldest daughter, Victoria, the Princess Royal. Every image of a British monarch for almost 1,000 years prior to this photograph was a painting or a drawing. This is a painting of John Quincy Adams. He's the 6th president of the United States of America. It would take 10 presidencies after him before we get to Abraham Lincoln, but he's the first president where we can know exactly what he looked like. This is the earliest known photograph of an American president. It was taken in March 1843 when Adams was 75 years old, 14 years after his presidency. Speaking of Abraham Lincoln, here he is as a young man in 1846. He'd just been elected as a congressman and obviously thought he'd take advantage of this wonderful new invention, the daguerreotype photograph. The first durable colour photograph was taken in 1861 by Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell. He photographed this ribbon 3 times, each with a different coloured filter. When the 3 images were superimposed onto a screen, it formed a full colour image. Those 3 plates are still kept in a small museum in Edinburgh, in the house that he was born in. Some say that this photograph was the world's first photograph, again taken by Joseph Nicéphore Niepce. It was taken in 1825, a year before the view from the window at Daguerre. But this image was not taken from life. It's a photograph of a 17th century Flemish engraving. This young man would have been long gone at the time of this photograph, so I don't think it counts. I want to end this segment now with 3 events which have always seemed to me to be mind-boggling and great examples of how those early photography pioneers were able to bring history to life for us now in the 21st century. 3 of the world's greatest landmarks, which to us seem like they've always been there throughout history. They are, however, so recent that we have a photographic record of their construction. Can you imagine a world without the Statue of Liberty? Here's our stunning record of its construction. Various parts of it were displayed in Paris before it was shipped and assembled in New York. The Eiffel Tower. When I first saw this image, I thought it had been photoshopped, but no, here it is under construction. And Tower Bridge. We can be forgiven for thinking it's hundreds of years old. After all, it was designed to fit in with the Tower of London, but it is in fact so young we can see it being built. Today we can snap a photo of this iconic bridge on our phone and not give it a second thought. What a long way we've come from that windowsill at Daguerre. Please allow me just 15 seconds to plug this channel. Very Nearly Interesting is a brand new channel and I need all the help I can get. Please hit that like button if you've enjoyed this video. That's how YouTube knows you like it and they'll show it to more people. And please consider subscribing. That way we might see you again. If you enjoyed those, then you'll find the story I'm about to show you fascinating. It's the story of the world's first movie, Roundhay garden scene, and the events leading up to it. It wasn't shot in Hollywood, it was shot in Leeds, England. Some of the content in this video overlaps slightly with what you've just seen, but I've left it intact so that you can see all of the twists and turns in context. I hope you enjoy it. In this video, we're going to explore the journey between the world's first photograph and the world's first movie, and a little bit beyond. For the record, the gap between the 2 events is 62 years, an astonishingly short period of time, less than the length of a human lifespan. I decided to make this video for one simple reason. There doesn't seem to be one that already exists, not one that links the 2 events together. No video, it seems, charts the twists and turns of events from the very first photograph to the very first movie. There's a story between the 2 and it's a very fast-paced one. But human advancement is a little bit like that, isn't it? It sometimes takes just one small breakthrough to lead to rapid and enormous leaps in progress. It was like that with the first flight. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright achieved for the first time ever powered, controlled, heavier-than-air flight in a rickety wooden plane barely powerful enough to lift the pilot into the air. 66 years later, we were walking on the moon. 66 years! Again, a huge leap in less than a human lifespan. You could have witnessed the sight of the first flight at Kitty Hawk at the age of 10 and then watch Saturn V blast off to the moon at the age of 76. Another example, computers. The world's first programmable, electronic, general-purpose digital computer was completed in 1945. 53 years later, we had Google. You could have started your working life in 1945 working on the world's first computer, the ENIAC, and then announced the details of your retirement party online at the age of 71. I could keep going with these examples, but my favourite is electricity. We'd known of electricity in one form or another for centuries, but then in 1831, Michael Faraday made a breakthrough in generating a consistent and reliable form of electricity. By 1879, Thomas Edison was lighting the streets with it. That one took just 48 years. Give humanity an inch, and it takes a mile. That's how photography became cinematography. The journey from the very first photograph to the very first film took 62 years, and there were only several characters bridging that divide. Some are well known and some aren't. The story of how they weave and intertwine with each other's lives, though, is definitely not well known. To start this video, we need to go way back to the 1820s. In fact, any thorough video looking at the history of movies, TV, photography, cinema, or even YouTube must go back to where we're going to now. An event that happened in 1826. That's when the first photograph ever was taken by Joseph Nicéphore Niepce. He took the world's first photograph on his own invention, a camera obscura, using a process that he called heliography. Experts who have studied the various angles of the shadows on this photograph estimate that exposure was achieved over 8 hours. Some people think exposure took several days. He left the camera obscura on a high-up windowsill at his country estate at a tiny commune, Le Gras, in eastern France. It's now known to history as the view from the window at Le Gras. People who name photographs, they're a special breed, aren't they? The view from the window at Le Gras. Even if this is not the very first photograph ever taken, we can say two things. One, it's the earliest surviving photo. And two, if there's an earlier lost photograph, then that one was taken by Niepce as well. He is, without doubt, the father of photography. Today, the original plate is housed under very special conditions at the Harry Ransom Center in Austin, Texas. You can go and visit there and see the plate that he touched and captured an image of the world almost 200 years ago. This grainy photograph of outbuildings at his estate, captured in a little wooden box, sitting out on the windowsill all day, changed the world. Cinema, television, YouTube, virtual reality, augmented reality. You can draw a line from all of these and eventually get back to that windowsill in Le Gras in 1826. For the rest of the time that humans exist and care to look back at what the world looked like in the past, then 1826 is the limit. Prior to that, you're looking at someone else's interpretation of the world through a painting. Niepce allows us to see the world how it actually was. It's rightly held up as a world's first, in the same bracket as the world's first computer and the first flight. Niepce not only solved the problem of reproducing nature by light, but he also invented the first photomechanical reproduction process. But he couldn't solve those ridiculously long exposure times. He knew that was the next hurdle, so he threw everything he had at the problem. Sadly, by 1829, his enthusiasm was running low, and so were his funds. He had no choice but to start to collaborate with fellow French inventor and photographic pioneer Louis Daguerre. The result of that collaboration was fruitless though, and Niepce died penniless from a stroke in 1833. He never made a penny from his invention. He died so poor that the local municipality had to pay for his funeral. He was buried very near to that window at Le Gras, the very window that guarantees Niepce a gargantuan place in the history of mankind. He did so reluctantly, but to his great credit, he did pass on the baton to Daguerre, who enthusiastically ran with it. Niepce's son continued the collaboration with Daguerre following his father's death, and even shared with him all the information his father had learned about his heliographic process. Daguerre was standing on the shoulders of Niepce, and with his baton did eventually succeed in massively reducing the exposure time of photographs. In 1838, he had his major breakthrough. He was able to take a photograph with an exposure time of just 15 minutes. He was still using a camera obscura, but he had revolutionised the chemical process to deliver the right results. He sold his invention to the French government, which in turn meant his invention could be used around the world royalty-free. That meant that his brand new process would spread like wildfire across the globe over the next 10 years. Daguerre had invented a process that would become known as the daguerreotype. For the first time ever, photography had become commercially viable. If you find a photograph that was taken between 1838 and the mid-1850s, it will be a daguerreotype. Like Niepce, he took his breakthrough photograph from a window, but this time the window was in central Paris at his office, overlooking le boulevard du Temple. This is actually an extremely busy morning street scene in Paris, but all the pedestrians and horse-drawn carriages can't be seen because no one hung around for the required exposure time, except this guy. He'd stopped to get his shoe shined. He was stood there long enough to be captured, and in doing so became the first human being ever to be photographed. I really want to believe that he just happened to be there, innocently strolling along the boulevard du Temple, before making an impulsive shoe-shine purchase decision on the way to work, completely oblivious to the fact that he would go down in history and be remembered for centuries to come. Some believe, however, that Daguerre staged it, that they synchronised their watches to make sure that the exposure process started the second our mystery man engaged the services of the shoeshine guy. We'll never know. This photograph is an incredible milestone in photography, cinematography, and the story of mankind. It's the first photograph that could be taken reasonably quickly, and the first photograph to feature a living and breathing human being. I say living because we've got every reason to believe a dead person was photographed before this. The dead can deal quite comfortably with an 8-hour exposure process. There's other people in the photo too. We can see part of the shoeshine guy, and this may be a child popping their head around the curtains, wondering what on earth Daguerre was doing with a strange box on his windowsill. Whilst we may look at the process today of taking a daguerreotype photograph as incredibly complex and time-consuming, there's plenty of YouTube videos out there explaining the process. By the early 1840s, it was seen as a simple way of starting up a thriving business. By 1845, you didn't have to travel more than a few miles in Britain, Europe, or the United States to find a daguerreotype portrait studio. It was big business. With money in his pocket from the French government, Daguerre set up his own studio in Paris, and he was keen to pass on his knowledge to students and other budding photographers. Possibly the youngest of his students was the son of a French army major who was friends with Daguerre. His friend's son, Louis Le Prince, was only 8 or 9 when Daguerre taught him chemistry and photography from his studio at 5 Rue de Marais, overlooking Le Boulevard du Temple, the scene of his defining work. The budding photographer didn't get much time to spend with Daguerre, however, as he died by the time Le Prince was only 10 years old. But the fire had been lit, and a passion for photography had been started in that studio that would last Le Prince a lifetime. By 18, Le Prince was off to university. It was too early for a degree in photography to even exist, so he studied painting and chemistry at Leipzig University. It was probably at Leipzig where Le Prince formed a close friendship with English student John Whitley. Whitley was fluent in 4 languages and had graduated from several European universities during a prolonged education. He continued his friendship with Le Prince long after his return to the family firm, Whitley Partners, in Leeds. The family firm, a brass foundry, was headed up by its founder, John's father, Joseph Whitley. Keen for his friendship to continue and recognising his undoubted abilities, John Whitley offered Le Prince a position at Whitley Partners as a manager in the valve-making department. Le Prince immediately accepted. So within 12 months of finishing university, Louis Le Prince had left France, got a job at his friend's firm in Leeds, England, and he was on his way in life. He got something else as well. He quickly fell in love with Elizabeth Whitley while living in Leeds, John's sister, and they were married in 1869. Louis and Lizzie, as she was known, were kindred spirits and did rather gel. Louis was an engineer with a secret love of photography, and Lizzie was a keen artist. They started the Leeds Technical School of Art, their main line of trade being fixing colour photography onto metal and pottery. Whilst an initial success, it didn't go entirely according to plan, as it was interrupted by the siege of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Le Prince fought for his country to defend Paris. By 1881, Le Prince had found employment in the United States, and that's where he raised his children. They all remained there long after his contract of employment ended. He spent his time there producing large panoramas with other French artists, predominantly major battles in history. It was also during his time in the United States that he began his fascination with moving images, apparently inspired by fairground zoetropes, and a story recounted by his wife where he dropped a pile of photographs. As they landed one by one, he noticed they gave the same illusion of movement as did the zoetropes. Zoetropes are fleeting and can't be recorded, which was clearly unsatisfying to Le Prince, and he began experimenting with other ways to create motion using his hitherto unrealised photographic knowledge. His idea was to create a camera with multiple lenses, to create a series of photographs to create the illusion of movement. He knew enough about photography, engineering, and the chemical processes at this point to make a camera that could fire 16 photographs separated only by a split second. By 1886, it was complete. The Le Prince 16-lens camera took a series of pictures using 16 independent shutters, fired in sequence. It's thought that the machine was operated with only a single glass plate, limiting results to a 16-image sequence. By 1887, Louis, Lizzie and their children were back in Leeds and set up a workshop at 160 Woodhouse Lane with financial backing from her father, Joseph Whitley. It was from here that Le Prince worked on his very first moving images piece of work, lovingly known to history as A Man Walking Around a Corner. How did they come up with these names? The location of the scene isn't known for sure, but it's highly likely to be at the then location of Whitley Partners at Hunslet Road, Leeds. At that time it was called the Railway Works, and it's likely that the man featured was a worker at Whitley Partners. He looks every bit the foundry man to me. A man walking around a corner lasts for less than a second, but Le Prince had achieved what he'd set out to do. He had recorded moving images, but it wasn't a film in the technical sense. They were individually shot images stitched together to create the illusion of movement. He had no way of projecting the work to create the illusion. All he was left with was 16 virtually identical photographs. He knew he could do better, and he knew the answer was a single lens. Miraculously, 2 years previously to this, inventor and entrepreneur George Eastman had launched a paper negative film. This, combined with the knowledge that Le Prince had acquired in building his 16-lens camera, he built his crowning glory, the world's first single-lens moving images camera, capable of using Eastman's new film. He built it at 160 Woodhouse Lane in Leeds. Everything came together for him at that point. His studies with Daguerre when he was a little boy, his studies at Leipzig University, his work with his wife Lizzie on their creative endeavours, his rapid-fire 16-lens camera, and now the development of Eastman's paper negative film, the very first moving image to be shot by Le Prince on film, and the very first moving film ever to be shot in the entire world, was shot at the home of his mother and father-in-law, Joseph and Sarah Whitley, at Roundhay in Leeds. Le Prince had befriended Joseph's son, he'd married Joseph's daughter, he'd worked for him at Whitley Partners Foundry. He'd benefited from his funding to operate his workshop with Lizzie, and now he was going to make him the world's first movie star. The magic happened on the 14th of October, 1888. 62 years after the view from the window at Daguerre, Le Prince made the short journey to Roundhay in Leeds, the home of his industrialist father-in-law Joseph and his mother-in-law Sarah. Le Prince's son Adolphe Prince and family friend Annie Hartley completed the cast lineup. The scene was shot in the garden at Roundhay, and the resulting film is now known as the Roundhay garden scene. It's the first genuine film to be shot on a single lens directly onto film, which could then be projected. The garden where it was filmed sadly no longer exists, and neither does the stately home, Oakwood Grange, the home of Joseph and Sarah Whitley. But I can show you where it was filmed and where the magic happened. I walked in the footsteps of those groundbreaking individuals earlier this year. In fact, it was one of the very first videos I made for this channel. I'm going to show you the clip now. It's just 4 minutes long. I'll be right back. Before we take a look at where it was shot, let's take a look at the film first. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Roundhay garden scene. It lasts for 1.66 seconds and consists of just 20 frames. Blink and you miss it, which is why it's on a loop. It's shot at 12 frames per second. You may be thinking that the plot is a little thin and it wouldn't win an Oscar, but what you're looking at here is a monumentally and historically important artifact. It was filmed in the garden of Oakwood Grange at Roundhay. These 4 people are the first in all of human history to be recorded in a movie. You are looking at moving human beings during the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. No one survives on recorded film before these 4 groundbreaking individuals. Roundhay garden scene even has its own IMDb page with a synopsis. In the garden, a man asks his friends to do something silly for him to record on film. And we have a date of filming, 14th of October, 1888. And we even have a full cast list. More about those later. But exactly where was this moment in time captured? We're going to find out. Behind me is Oakwood Hall. It's now a residential care home, but in 1888 it was a stately home. Next door to it, adjacent to it, that way, was Oakwood Grange. It's now been demolished. The only structure now remaining of Oakwood Grange is this boundary wall. Past it you can see the modern housing estate which now sits on the site of Oakwood Grange. This is Oakwood Hall, where I am now, and this is the site of Oakwood Grange adjacent to it. This aerial shot gives a better idea of the layout. Oakwood Hall has a large footprint, shown here in green, and Oakwood Grange next door would have been similar, shown here in red. This turning head is the closest publicly accessible area to where Oakwood Grange once stood, and to my mind is likely to form part of the garden of Oakwood Grange. You can see from the video that filming took place very close to the house. If it wasn't shot in the area of the turning head, then it was very close to this spot, give or take a few feet. This is where cinematic history was made. There's no access to the estate from Oakwood Hall, so we had to go the long way around just to get to next door. I'm now walking up Oakwood Grange. It's hard to be certain, but in my opinion, the exact spot of filming was at the turning head at the top of this cul-de-sac. It's a little bit like the moon landing. They were only taking small steps. But it was a giant leap for mankind. But it was a giant leap for mankind. But it was a giant leap for mankind. The young lady in the scene is known variously as Annie or Harriet Hartley. She's described as a friend of the family and may even have been in service at the stately home. This is Adolphe, Louis Le Prince's son. This is Sarah Whitley, and this is Joseph Whitley, the in-laws of Le Prince. Sarah Whitley died on the 24th of October, 1888, just 10 days after her starring role in the Roundhay garden scene. How many times have you walked in an old graveyard and seen a grave, 1800 and something, and wondered what they look like? Where did they live? Because we know nothing about these people. Well, you don't have to wonder with this particular grave. This is the grave of Joseph and Sarah Whitley, the world's first film stars. This grave was one of the supporting pieces of evidence used by the Guinness Book of Records to prove that Roundhay garden scene is indeed the oldest film in the world. It was reported that it was shot on the 14th of October 1888. Sarah Whitley died 10 days later on the 24th of October 1888. So we know that Roundhay garden scene was definitely 100% shot before the 24th of October 1888. That makes Roundhay garden scene the world's first film. Sarah Whitley was born in 1816, which makes her the earliest born female ever to appear in a film. She was also the very first person to appear in a film and then subsequently die. The reason the family lived in a stately home and the reason money was available for Le Prince's endeavours was because of industrialist Joseph Whitley. He must have been quite a man. Maybe it's just me, but the confident way he swashbuckles his way through this 1.66 second film seems to speak volumes about his character, energy and personality. The world's second movie was very possibly shot on the very same day. It's likely, but we're not sure. Here we see Adolphe Le Prince playing an accordion. He's wearing the same clothes and the camera appears to be positioned close to the spot where it was on Roundhay garden scene. These are clearly the same steps and this is clearly the same house. Adolphe was a couple of weeks away from his 16th birthday when this film was shot. Even though 60 years away from the term being coined, he seems a typical happy teenager in 1888. His third and final film was shot from that window on Leeds Bridge. Like Niepce and Daguerre before him, he'd set down his single-lens camera on a windowsill, that windowsill, and filmed the comings and goings on the bridge. The scene is similar to today, with very different modes of transport. A blue plaque unveiled in 1988 marks the supposed centenary of the Leeds Bridge film. I say supposed, as we can't be 100% sure when it was shot, but we do know it was after the 14th of October 1888 and before the 16th of September 1890. Le Prince's remarkable work predates the Lumiere brothers and Thomas Edison. By 1890, Le Prince had perfected his machine and developed a way to project the images to an audience, and that was his next plan. He booked rooms in New York in the autumn of 1890 for the world premiere of his films and to unveil his single-lens camera. Roundhay garden scene, the accordion player, Leeds Bridge were all surely to be on the bill. Prior to his trip to the United States, Le Prince went to Dijon to visit his brother Albert. This was probably to sort out the estate of their mother, who had died in 1887. After his visit, he jumped on a train at Dijon and headed for Paris, bound for England, but he never arrived in Paris. Even his luggage was missing from the train. He had seemingly vanished from the face of the earth and was never seen again. His public premiere in New York never happened, and it was left to Thomas Edison to develop the movie camera and to commercialise it. The rest, of course, is well-documented history. In 1891, Adolphe Prince served as a witness against Edison in an attempt to establish his father's legacy. The court ruled in Edison's favour. 10 years later, Adolphe was found shot dead whilst hunting in New York. To this day, it's not known whether it was suicide or murder by person or persons unknown. There's many theories about what happened to Louis Le Prince. Maybe his brother killed him over a dispute with his mother's will. Or maybe Thomas Edison had him killed before he could travel to the States and premiere his groundbreaking films and his revolutionary camera. Edison was aware of his camera and aware of the planned public demonstration of it. Le Prince was legally declared dead in 1897, and that's where our story ends. Less than a dozen people in our story, and 62 years to change the world. Now you know the world's earliest photographs and how they laid a path that would lead to the world's first movie. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, please click that like button. That way YouTube will show it to more people. And please consider subscribing. That way I might see you again. And please have a look at some of the other content on the channel. There's lots of interesting things on there. Well, very nearly interesting.